Welcome back. This is Metropole's Business. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kianga. Thank you very much for being part and parcel of our conversations this morning. You want to get involved? 20146, your SMS line at Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. Let's talk about our economic review this morning. Now, KCB Group has recorded a profit dip as a result of the 209.4% rise in its provision for loan losses, this rising to 27.5 billion. Now, the net profit for the lender declined 22% to 19.6 billion from 25.1 billion shillings a year earlier. Now, the biggest lender by assets in the country has also blamed the subdued economic activity in the country in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. The lender also announced that they will be paying a dividend of 1 shilling per share, totaling to 3.2 billion shillings, representing a 71.4% drop from the normal payout of 3.5 shillings per share, or a total of 11.2 billion in the pre-pandemic years. On the other hand, KCB subsidiary National Bank of Kenya saw its profit jump by 167%, with customer deposits experiencing a 14% growth to 99 billion shillings in the period under review. Joining us this morning to go through some of this bigger headline and also paint a picture of where we are in the economy as regards the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're joined in the studio by Awang. If you do remember, there's a man we've not seen since last year. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing quite well. How are you?
I'm okay. Happy to see you. All right. Online, we are joined by Arnold Nkasale, who's a microfinance banker. All right, let's talk about it then. Just before we cross over to that area, let's look at where KCB is coming from in terms of their performance this year. Assets and liabilities, where do they stand? And you can actually say that, well, their total liabilities this year are a bit higher from where they were last year. Profit for the year, let's look at what has been their profit for the year, and this is profit after tax from 2018 to 2020, and you can see that drop again from 2019 to 2020, a 6 billion drop from 25 to 19 billion shillings. All right, selected performance indicators for KCB as well are going to show you exactly where we are again in terms of what the effect has been over time from 2018 to 2020 as well. Now let's cross over to their subsidiary, who has also been quite impactful in terms of the number that we're paying this year in terms of the dividend for KCB. We're talking about National Bank of Kenya. That's where they are again, despite positivities as well. There's a talking point in terms of how the 3 billion they intend to inject into them, plus the 5 billion they injected back in 2019, has also been instrumental in terms of the results that KCB is giving you this morning as well. Let me begin with you, Arnold. How do you summarize that performance despite the effects of the coronavirus pandemic?
Thank you so much, Elijah, once more. Now, for KCB, I think KCB have been going through a lot in 2020, and as essentially the biggest bank in probably in East Africa, it's essentially a benchmark or a barometer to measure how probably the other banks will perform.
Yes.
Back in May 2020, KCB mentioned that they were restructuring about 15% of the loan book, which was about 80 billion Kenya shillings in the wake of the coronavirus. And I think most of the financial institutions pegged their restructuring on a short-term coronavirus kind of effect. I think during the course of 2020, guys realized that coronavirus was here to stay, and most banks had to actually do the restructures for the restructures they had already done, because most restructures were essentially done for 3 months.
Yes. And
then they were further restructured even to 3 years, postponing of interest income for up to 3 years. So with KCB, it's been a very edgy kind of 2020. On the other hand, they also did an acquisition last year, and they were essentially trying to grow their asset base as far as the region is concerned. So the idea was to try and grow their asset base so that at the end of the day, you're growing your balance sheet and you're growing your interest income position. And then the other thing, you have a situation whereby those provisions really, apart from COVID, you also have to look at the economic performance which affected their customers.
Yes.
So they had to do, apart from restructuring, it simply meant that some loans went bad, and they had to do, they essentially had to provide for the loans which had gone bad, and that essentially explains why their profit has gone down from 25 to 19 billion as far as the year 2020 is concerned. So it's a juggling act as far as KCB is concerned.
Yes.
On this other side, they have a subsidiary which is performing very well. I think National Bank are performing very well because of several aspects. Number one, they've increased their asset base. Number two, they've also increased their position in terms of deposit. You realize National Bank are the biggest bankers of the Nairobi Metropolitan Service. And you realize there have been changes as far as revenue collection, ceiling of income leakage is concerned, as far as Nairobi Metropolitan Services is concerned, and they bank at National Bank. So National Bank have really gained as far as such factors are concerned, and it has enabled them actually to post, I think, the best performance in 10 odd years. Yes. As far as business is concerned. So National Bank are on the right trajectory. They're going to get another injection for capital from KCB of about 3 billion, which will enable them essentially balance their position as far as capital reserve ratios are concerned. So it's an interesting picture. And then back to KCB, just one thing I had forgotten to mention. You realize KCB, part of the people they're lending to are very large institutions. At the moment, KCB are trying to sort out a facility of about 7 billion, which they have given to the National Cereals and Produce Board. They had essentially given a 4 billion shilling facility, and it went bad. It accumulated interest of up to 3 billion, so it's 7 billion shillings in arrears. So you can imagine this is just one of their many corporate clients who have facilities which have gone bad. So yes. KCB, there's a lot which is going on as far as restructuring, repositioning of their business is concerned. For NBK, I think they're on the right trajectory. So essentially, KCB will be a barometer to measure how the other banks will deal. And then last but not least, on the dividend payout, at least they're still doing a dividend payout. Guys were used to dividend payouts of about 3 shillings per share, but now they'll be content at a shilling. So at least the dividends are still coming in. So it's an interesting scenario, and it looks like 2021 will be a year full of readjustments as far as business models are concerned for banks.
Pretty much. And I'll be coming back to you on that National Bank, because even as we talk about them posting what has been a stellar performance within that, the biggest question for them is capital adequacy, Arnold. Because if you look at the risk to weighted assets, again, they're missing on that ratio. Deposit ratio as well, even as you're talking about them increasing, they're missing on that as well. Deposit ratio as well, which is the biggest one as well. I'll be coming to talk to you about what it means vis-a-vis their capital adequacy. All right, now let me cross over to Ogwang. Yeah. How would you summarize that performance? I mean, everybody was talking about it's going to be the worst one we've ever seen. Good, it's still the worst so far, but how would you summarize it?
I would actually drop in something a little different.
Yes.
When it's very unfair to compare National Bank with KCB.
Yes.
Who is National Bank? If I was to take a statistic of people in this room, who holds a National Bank's card? No one, right?
Yes.
And the reason why I'm saying that, we are trying to mix two things. There is something called nominal value. The nominal value of KCB might appear to have sunk.
Yes.
But we are trying to look at who is KCB and what is KCB. So in order for us to appreciate that, we need to actually ask ourselves, where is KCB? KCB is no longer a local bank. So if you're looking at KCB, then we need to factor in that this is the performance of KCB across the board.
Yes.
KCB, as the gentleman has actually said, a huge part of their drive is in corporate clientele. And corporate clientele, as at now, they are stagnating as far as business performance is concerned.
Yes.
National Bank, on the other hand, might appear to be nominally doing very well, but National Bank is only serving a very small part of the entire banking industry. So as at now, KCB might actually appear to have suffering on nominal aspect, but when you're looking at pecuniary value,
yes,
the real value for cash, right? That is what it's considered. And in the real value of cash, then KCB is performing, because guess what? Everyone has suffered. Government has laid off people, right? KCB is still afloat,
yes.
right?
Yes.
All their business, all their business interests, all their presences are actually still ongoing and running. So if we were to look at that,
yes.
the challenge that we have, particularly in the African economy, is whereby we are pegging growth and we are pegging profitability against things that are actually not sustainable. What is the bedrock of KCB's competitiveness? The bedrock of KCB's competitiveness is KCB is diversifying into different markets. And in diversifying into different market territories, we ought actually to look at KCB is moving well. If you were to ask me if I was an investor between the two, whom would I choose? I would choose KCB.
Yes.
None, notwithstanding what they're giving, 1 shilling dividend, guess what? They are still giving dividend, even as at now. There are banks that actually say that, no, we are thinking we are going to hold on the dividend share. But KCB as at now, they are really driving that, and they're trying to ensure that the shareholder value of their shareholders is actually constant. But with that understanding, the interest of performance, KCB is opening up into new spaces. So if I was to actually give an analysis out of that, I would actually say KCB is on the right trajectory.
Yes.
It might just, the world over, economies are swinging. The world over, economies are swinging. But KCB is still expanding, it's still diversifying, it's still penetrating into new regions, and it's still acquiring. So the performance of the subsidiary might appear nominal, but it's not pecuniary. Pecuniary is in the growth of the shareholder value. The shareholder value from the start.
Yes.
Yes, Simba.
Pretty much. All right, let me cross over to Arnold as well. Arnold, good. And let me just point you out to another bank that just released the results yesterday as well. Cooperative Bank, again, that is telling us down. They've made a profit before tax of 14.3. But if you compare where they were again, which was 20.7 billion, then you can actually see exactly what it is we're talking about. That is also another huge loss in terms of, decline in terms of their profitability. Arnold, when we're looking at these banks, we do expect that, well, there's going to be a drop in profitability. But at what ratios are we comparing them at? Which would be a very big loss.
Yeah, so you realize also CoBank will also pay a dividend of $1.
Yes.
So the big boys have enough muscle, enough capital, enough client base,
yes,
to absorb the shock. So if you look at the entire banking industry, the big boys have what it takes to maneuver, and that's why CoBank and KCB are still in a position to pay dividends. We are yet to see the Tier 2 and Tier 3 banks. I think their financials will come out at the end of this month. By Q1, all these banks should have released their financials.
Yes.
So from the banks with the smaller client bases, it simply means they have little room to maneuver. So we're not sure what we'll see, if we'll see losses, if we'll see reduced positions as far as profits are concerned. But I suspect that is what we will see. We will essentially see banks providing more, and when you're doing more provisions, it simply means you're eating more into profitability. And I think Omuga has alluded to something very critical as far as KCB is concerned. Their biggest advantage is that they are moving into a regional space.
Yes.
Same as the likes of Equity Bank. That move into a regional space gives you an advantage as far as business is concerned. But for guys who are limited as far as business is concerned, in terms of their client base, in terms of their reach, in terms of their footprint, it's a different conversation altogether. And I feel that we will have a need of remodeling our business as the effects of the coronavirus sink in.
Yes.
You have mentioned something with NBK as far as capital ratios are concerned. I think capital ratios, you look at the core capital of a business, and for banks, core capital is very crucial to how much you can lend versus how much you can take in as deposits. So what KCB are doing is essentially adding the capacity of National Bank by injecting the 3 billion. They initially injected 5 billion when they took it over as a subsidiary, and it looks like, based on the business which is available for them, the 3 billion will go a long way in enabling them to increase capacity, absorb more shocks, and essentially do more business as far as their client base is concerned. So I think 2021 is going to be a year whereby a lot of business remodeling will be happening and will be necessary simply because of how the economy is being remodeled by the effects of COVID-19.
All right, Ogwang, let's cross over then to that conversation as well. And I would like to ask you two questions on that. I mean, for any investor looking at exactly what KCB is doing, and part of the factors is why KCB is not actually even gotten close to paying what we're normally used to in terms of their dividend of 3 shillings and 50 cents. Number one, they are now going to spend 4.4 billion. All right, to acquire 2 more banks in Tanzania and Rwanda. And then we look at exactly what that money has gone into as well. It is the capital adequacy for its subsidiary, National Bank of Kenya, 3 billion shillings. Do you think that anybody looking at it will say, wow, that's not really what the priority should be in the longer term for an investor to put their money in KCB saying, well, the bigger bank, and we expect them to go through the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and weather the effects pretty good, just like they've done?
The KCB brand is at a point whereby now they are not performing at this local league. Their eyes are actually, how do we dominate our neighbors? And so if in dominating our neighbors, there are only 2 chances. Either we can set up another KCB in Tanzania, or we can actually acquire a bank that is actually existing, that has operation in Tanzania as at now. So KCB, for an investor, there are 2 types of investors. There are those investors that you look at things and you just want a short-term kick. If you want a short-term kick, then KCB is not your option. If you want a short-term kick, then go for National Bank, because National Bank is saying, yeah, you guys are making cash. If you want a long-term priority, if you're looking at a long-term trajectory, as an investor, majority of investors, they have this thing called long-term appetite. I want to be stable. I want to operate with a brand and that it actually understands it understands its market. Show me a bank in Kenya today that has the ability to actually redefine markets in Kenya today. There are only 2 banks. One is KCB. So which means in whichever environment then they peer into, they will still have the same effect in those environments. So for any investor who is actually looking at, I'm looking at putting my money, and I'm talking about a 15-year time duration, then KCB is your point. Why? Because their investment in Tanzania, if at all, when you're talking about Tanzania, how many people are we talking about? Tanzania has a population of hundreds of millions, right? Which means Tanzanian market can actually sustain the Kenyan economy as far as the banking industry is concerned. And that is why they are actually held, and that's the good thing again is the strength of our shilling vis-a-vis the Tanzanian shilling. So that's why the bank can actually put in 4.4 billion to actually acquire 2. And part of the acquiring of the 2 will actually make sure that in as much as these 2 banks are performing in their own independent and individual brands, but guess what? They are performing at our interest. So any long-term investor, any person that wishes actually to be here and you want to be stable as far as the market and the banking industry is actually defining and redefining itself, I would actually go with KCB.
Pretty much. All right, gentlemen, I would like to beg so that we move on to the next conversation this morning. Kenya Power, which now plans to switch off customers who have unsettled power bills as the utility firm looks to improve its cash position following a report by the Auditor General that, wait a minute, it is technically insolvent and requires a government bailout to stay afloat. Now, postpaid customers Wednesday received a notification from the power provider to immediately settle any outstanding electricity bills to avoid the accounts being disconnected. Now, the report by the Auditor General as of June 30th, 2020 shows that the Kenya Power recorded a loss before tax, wait for it, of 7.04 billion, with its liabilities standing at 117.5 billion, far outweighing its current assets of 42.63 billion by 74.85 billion. That deserves a wow. Now, gross unpaid electricity sales for the power provider hit 23.55 billion at the end of June 2019 from 22.19 billion in the previous year. Now, the Auditor General's report also highlighting that the power purchase agreements, that's the PAA, with power producers, which account to 54% of the total cost of sales, are the ones that continue to affect the performance of the agency. Wow. All right. Let's look at where Kenya Power is in terms of their performance. Let's cross over to that data that we have for you this morning. And if we look at where they are right now, that is the report by the Auditor General. If you look at where they are in 2020, that negative there, and it's a big red if you look at that margin as well, and loss after tax, that's where we are as well in terms of Kenya Power. You can actually say it. So let's look at the data that we have for this morning, which I also question is just going to be negatives as well in the next data set that we have for you, and you can look at that all the way from revenue growth quarterly, year on year, to net profit margin growth. There's nothing that is on a positive as far as Kenya Power is concerned, which led the Auditor General to say, well, you are technically insolvent and you need the government to bail you out if at all you're going to continue. Arnold, let me bring you in. How do we get to this level? Are we looking at it? I mean, if you look at those liabilities that are 74 billion negative from where the assets are, how do you get a company there without raising an alarm that things are going the wrong way? What was the Auditor General, and what action do we need therefore to save Kenya Power?
Well, Kenya Power, when I saw those numbers,
yes.
I was terrified. Simply because you're looking at numbers which are worse than KQ. You're looking at numbers which are worse than KQ.
They are worse than KQ.
Worse than KQ, 2 times over. So, unfortunately for Kenya Power, there's been a mix of poor collection of monies as far as power distribution is concerned.
Yes.
Governance issues. A lot of governance issues, because you're talking about a monopoly. So essentially, it really doesn't make sense. You're having a monopoly which is making losses. So with Kenya Power, we have a lot of governance issues and a lot of efficiency issues which need to be addressed. And I think Kenya Power's position as an intermediary, as a power distributor, have put it at a disadvantage, simply because you realize back in the day when Kenya Power was KPLC, Kenya Power and KenGen are essentially the same institution.
Yes.
And it was a situation whereby you didn't have intermediary costs. You didn't have costs whereby you're buying power from point X and selling it to point Y. It was one institution. But when KenGen, it left Kenya Power in a situation whereby it became a delicate juggling act, whereby you're getting power from certain sources and you're distributing to certain sources at a margin.
Yes.
So it's a business which is sustainable because it's a monopoly. But when you have a situation whereby you have poor governance, you have embezzlement of funds, you have situation whereby back in 2017, 2018, before Kenya Power cleaned house, there are situations whereby management had companies which were on the supply and contractor list. So it's a very messy situation as far as Kenya Power is concerned. And it's very unfortunate that the government will have, again, to come up with a bailout plan for KPLC, which is very, 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 very massive. Guys have been talking about privatization, but at the end of the day, you have to factor in who has the muscle to inject over 70 billion in an institution? Who has that muscle? And if that person comes in, what kind of service will they provide? So it's a situation whereby the government has to come in. A lot of reorganization has to be done at Kenya Power. A lot of austerity measures may have to be taken at Kenya Power because it looks like even basic costing at Kenya Power is a problem. So a lot needs to be done. A lot of reorganization needs to be done at Kenya Power. So it's very unfortunate. It's a mammoth task. It may take a few years. I remember it also led to Kenya Power being delisted on the NSE because it would have simply eroded a lot of investor capital on the boss. So it's very unfortunate that Kenya Power is in this situation. And I feel that the recourse may take some years. We're talking about 2-3 years. If you look at KQ, which was at -27B, has taken this long to resolve, then what about Kenya Power? It looks like Kenya Power may take maybe 3, 4, 5 years to resolve before reorganization is done, repackaging of the business is done, and realignment is done as far as the business is concerned. It's a very unfortunate position. Very, very unfortunate.
All right, let me bring you in, Ogwang. Let's just go through the numbers again for the sake of somebody who just didn't get them. Now, if you look at what the Auditor General report says, is that the liabilities now stand at 117.5 billion. So if you look at the assets, which are the 42 billion, then you're talking about negative 74 billion. If you want to bring that company into operating level, the amount of money that they want from switching off these meters is just 23 billion. So even if they want to get it tomorrow, even if they'll switch it tomorrow and get all this money, you're still talking about negative 51 B for them to be on now operating capacity. Because according to the Auditor General, you are not a company. You are insolvent. Well, I'll ask you the same question that I've asked Arnold. We didn't wake up to Kenya Power being here, and we've had Auditor Generals who've been auditing the books of Kenya Power through the entire time. Did somebody watch and say, well, let them get there because we need them to get there? Because I gotta ask that question.
Okay. The problem is this, and I really like what Arnold had mentioned.
Yes.
He labored to actually look at where the problem started.
Yes.
Allow me to touch on something called power purchase agreement. This is the problem. There is, and if I was to say we cannot even have a conversation about privatization, there are things you don't privatize.
Yes.
You don't privatize power. If you privatize power, you leave your populace at the mercies of people. So there are things you don't privatize. You don't privatize your port, which incidentally we have. So the moment you privatize your port, you've actually locked yourself in. So someone can only say nothing will be moving in and out. That one needs to be with government. You don't privatize airport. You don't privatize your national carrier. Because if anything, ikienda sagemnege. It's called sagemnege. Anyway, so there are things you don't privatize. Like you cannot have a conversation on privatization of power.
Yes.
That one cannot. It has to be state-owned.
Is it?
It has to be it has to be state-owned. But the problem here is, right, when you're talking about, and actually the Auditor General has identified it, the challenge is not even in corporate corruption as far as it's concerned. He has actually identified the challenge is the power purchase agreement.
Yes.
So the power purchase agreement is at this level. One, we have competition from external power. There is power coming from Uganda, which is very cheap. Power that is being sold by KenGen is very high.
Yes.
So guess what? KenGen is the single seller to KP. So in as much as KPLC gets power from KenGen, that power is not equalized with the power that is coming from Uganda, because the power that is coming from Uganda is cheaper on the strength of our shilling. But so you get this power, but again, you're paying this person like you're paying them twice. This person is giving you power that is actually very costly. Then power is again coming from Tanzania. The power that is coming from Tanzania, on the basis of the strength of our shilling, is actually cheaper. So the problem here is KCB is in a conundrum.
Yes.
No, KCB. KPLC is in a conundrum.
Yes.
The challenge here is this. How is it that with the electric grid, every house, every village in Kenya today is actually electrified? KPLC is actually selling a commodity they're not manufacturing. The worst point to be in any business is to sell something that you don't manufacture yourself. But again, that is what we are saying, it's specialization. So these people will actually manufacture power and they will hand you that power. The challenge is not with the people that are defaulting in paying. The challenge is with there is a phrase they have for it, the tariffs.
Yes.
The power tariffs. That is the challenge. Not unless KenGen comes to the point whereby they can be competitive with the power that is coming externally. That is the point whereby KPLC might actually decide to break even and become competitive. To that extent, and the challenge that we have, it's not a question of who has 100 billion. Kenyans have cash, ridiculous money. Kenyans have ridiculous money. So it's not a question of can we find a private entity to buy.
Yes.
If I'm telling you I can buy KPLC by midday today, right? I can just put a few people together and we'll get the money. The challenge is we need to go back and renegotiate the power purchase agreement and let us be competitive. Let us be competitive. Uganda is selling power at a very competitive rate. Today, Tanzania is actually selling power at a very competitive rate.
Yes.
KenGen is the problem.
Let me just confirm from the director whether we're supposed to go on a break. Is it time? Ah, fantastic. Because once we come back, then Arnold, you hear Wang is saying it's not even corruption, because people can't just sit and see a company go to a negative 74 billion in terms of its difference between liabilities and assets. It's got to be that power purchase agreements. Now it's all known that we buy, that we buy goods, that's the word, that we buy more than we actually need and consume within the economy. Why can't we just correct that? Or, Arnold, when worse comes to worse, we declare force majeure and say, well, we can't continue to pay for this. We can only pay for what we can accommodate. Once we come back here on a business, we're still on that issue for Kenya Power being, according to the Auditor General, technically insolvent.